head to Liverpool,
Recording in progress.
where he watched the ships that had plied their trade from the wharves and docks of the city that grew on shipbuilding and the commerce of the world, and which was the control center of the Atlantic naval operations during World War II, known as the Western Approaches. He was also not far from the entrance to the Manchester Ship Channel and would spend time watching the freighters of the world as they passed, opening the inland city of Manchester to international trade. Ray took a degree in food technology in London. He followed with a career first in the meat industry, then the chocolate business. Ray and his family lived in a village near the ancient city of York, with a history dating back to the Vikings and Roman times, an area hotly contested during the Civil War. Ray, his wife, and 3 children were exported to Canada in 1971 by his company and became vice president of manufacturing of the Canadian branch of Rowntree's, the makers of Kit Kat, Chocolate Crisp, Smarties, Black Magic, and After 8 Minutes. And don't we all enjoy those? He took up ship modeling as a hobby during our Canadian winters, initially building from kits, but later graduating to scratch building. Ray is a member of the Metro Marine Modelers. He is also a founding member of the Model Shipwrights of Niagara. In addition to building his own models, Ray also restores old and damaged models for private individuals and public institutions to museum quality standards of accuracy and finishing the finish of the hull and rigging. His Admiralty style model of the 22 gunship HMS Ontario, a Snow, which sank in the lake in 1780, was built after considerable research, and it's considered to be the authentic model of the ship. And this is the 3rd time Ray has spoken at Shellbacks. And he's got a couple of models with him here today of the Bismarck, and he's going to tell you all about them. Give Ray a big warm shout out.
Can we raise this so that I got
Yeah, we can. You want to take the piano off? Want this raised now? No, he wants it. This good? Okay, so I need to go a little higher. Let's put the piano back on.
this one?
You want the expand to lift this up, or is it already?
This is okay.
Okay, it's fine.
Well, I'm gonna carry that.
We do.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Okay,
Very close.
very close like that. You can hear me, everyone.
No, very close.
Sorry.
That's good.
So in the nautical world, we usually think of prisoner of war models as those made from ivory or bone in the 19th century by prisoners held in British Britain during the Napoleonic Wars. Based on the wooden warships of the French Navy, they were made by sailors to while away the time. And often they were sold to earn money to supplement their meager ration of poor quality food or to gain extra favors from their guards. However, they're not the only prisoner of war who made models. To give some background and context to this talk, I'll start with some information on the subject of the models, the battleship Bismarck, and then show photos before and after my restoration for the benefits of everybody in the room and on the Zoom. So to start a little about the battleship Bismarck, named for the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who in the second half of the 19th century effectively ruled first Prussia and then all of Germany. Bismarck and her slightly bigger sister ship, the Tirpitz, was the largest battleship built by Germany. Bismarck was launched in February 1939. She was 823 feet long, which is almost 7 football fields, with a beam of 118 feet and a draft of 30 feet 6 inches. She displaced 54,000 tons, fully loaded, and her oil-fired boilers, driving 3 propellers, gave her a top speed of 30 knots. Her main armament consisted of 8 15-inch guns that could fire a shell weighing 1,900 pounds for a distance of 20 miles. She also had 12 5.9-inch guns, 16 4.1-inch guns, and 16 1.5-inch anti-aircraft guns. Bismarck conducted only one offensive operation during her 8 months career. Codenamed Rheinübung, this operation lasted for 8 days in May 1941. The plan was for the ship to break out into the Atlantic Ocean and disrupt Allied shipping convoys from North America to Great Britain. To this end, she left the port of Trondheim in Norway on a route taking her through the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland, where at the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the battle cruiser HMS Hood, known as the Mighty Hood, was sunk by the combined fire of Bismarck and the accompanying heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. Of Hood's crew of 1,415, only 3 survived. Bismarck suffered sufficient damage from 3 hits by Prince of Wales to force an end to the raiding mission, and she began to make for Brest to return to repair and refuel. The loss of Hood goaded the British Admiralty into action. Winston Churchill told them, "I don't care how you do it, you must sink the Bismarck." Part of his motivation was national revenge, but it also made sense to eliminate such a dangerous piece of the German war machine. Spurred into relentless pursuit by the Royal Navy, dozens of warships were involved. British codebreakers were able to decrypt some of the German signals, including an order to the Luftwaffe to provide support to Bismarck, making for Brest. The French resistance also provided the British with confirmation that Luftwaffe units were relocating there. On the 26th of May, a Catalina seaplane located her, some 690 nautical miles northwest of Brest. At her then current speed, the Bismarck would have been close enough to reach the protection of U-boats and the Luftwaffe in less than a day. Most British forces were not close enough to stop her. The only heavy ships capable of challenging her were the battleships King George V and Rodney, but they were too distant. The only possibility for the Royal Navy was the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, steaming at full speed from the direction of the Mediterranean. Coming in range of her aircraft, Ark Royal launched her very swordfish torpedo bombers, one of which scored a hit that jammed the battleship's rudder. Bismarck was then only able to steam on a broadly circular course at 7 knots, unable to escape the pursuing British ships. In the final battle, the crippled Bismarck was engaged by the 2 British battleships, King George V and Rodney, and the 2 heavy cruisers, Dorsetshire and Norfolk. Rodney closed the 3,000 yards point-blank range for her 16-inch guns and continued to fire. Bismarck was reduced to a shambles, aflame from stem to stern, and sustained incapacitating damage and heavy loss of life. Overall, the 4 British ships fired more than 2,800 shells at Bismarck, scored more than 400 hits, but still were unable to sink Bismarck by gunfire. Bismarck's captain and the fleet commander had been killed. The fact that the ship was no longer able to fight back caused Bismarck's executive officer to decide to scuttle her, to prevent the ship being boarded by the British, and to allow the crew to abandon ship to reduce casualties. Bismarck began to sink slowly. Finally, Dorsetshire fired torpedoes into Bismarck. By the time these torpedo attacks took place, Bismarck was listing so badly that the deck was partly awash. The final torpedo struck Bismarck's port side superstructure, which by then was underwater. Bismarck finally disappeared beneath the waves at 10:40 on the morning of the 27th of May, 1941. About 400 men were now in the water. Dorsetshire and the tribal class destroyer Maori moved in and lowered ropes to pull the survivors aboard. However, Dorsetshire's captain ordered the rescue effort abandoned after lookouts spotted what they thought was a U-boat. Dorsetshire had rescued 85 men, and Maori had picked up 25 by the time they left the scene. U-boat U-74 had been watching from a distance and rescued 3 men from a rubber dinghy in the evening. The next day, the German trawler Saxonwald rescued another 2 from a raft. One of the men picked up by the British died of his wounds the following day. Out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 115 survived. These were to spend the rest of the war in the prisoner of war camp at Lethbridge, Alberta, Britain no longer having the capacity to house prisoners of war on home territory. Camp 133, or Lager 133 to the Germans, housed more than 13,000 prisoners. Although it was a prison camp, it functioned as a town, many prisoners carrying on occupations they held in civilian life, such as tailors, mechanics, accountants, farmhands, musicians, carpenters, and doctors. Among the pastimes adopted by prisoners was making model ships. The models of Bismarck I'll show you today are examples made by prisoners of war, Lager 133. The first model I restored, which I'll call Bismarck I, was acquired by the present owner's grandfather, a decorated World War I machine gunner who served in several battles, including Vimy Ridge. In World War II, he served in the Veterans Guard of Canada, the counterpart of the British Home Guard, in then British Guiana and in Canada. In 1946, he escorted prisoners of war being returned to Germany including those interned in Camp 133. It is then that he acquired this extraordinary model. The model is enclosed in a case. I've taken it out. You can see it up here, but I'll now show the slides. This is the case, and for those who are in the room, there's the case. This is what I call a clamshell case. This slide shows the opening mechanism for the case. You see these two knobs. Excuse me.
There's water behind you.
Oh. There's the two knobs that you can see on the case itself. And the mechanism by which you open it is to twist the knobs and it'll open the clamshell. I'll leave that now for the time being. We'll see that later. And here is the clamshell opened with the model inside. The model can in fact be slid out from that case from the plate over the top of the hinges. And doing so, it reveals this text underneath. It says October 1944, Cargo 133, Lethbridge, Canada. And in the corner at the bottom is the initials WST. And I'll talk about that a bit later. So now let me talk about some of the conditions that I found when it was given to me. I hope you can see this. It's not quite as clear as I hoped it would be, but there was damage. The port fluke anchor fluke was missing. There's a double rail on the starboard side, but on the port side is missing. The forward breakwater was missing. And on the bottom of the stand, you can see there are pencil marks, which may have been boundaries for some decorative inserts. There's a broken mast at the top, that's the forward mast. Those black marks which are so prominent at the angle are broken rigging, which was cotton, stiffened by varnish. There are missing parts on those platforms, which are difficult to see in this photo, but if you can see some lighter patches on there indicating the parts were missing. And at the bottom is the broken mainmast, which would have gone onto the top of this one here. That would have gone on top of that mast there. There's the stern of the boat showing damaged missing rails. And on the left here is a missing boom. And mounted on the catapult track is an Arado float plane. Bismarck carried 4 of these, which were used for reconnaissance. What they used to do would be the float planes were located there's a hangar here, and the float planes were held in that hangar. So the float planes would be fired off from the catapult, do their reconnaissance, and then would land back on the water. And you'll see a bit later on that there was a crane, a big crane on either side of the model of the ship, which would hoist the Arado planes out of the water and remount them back on the catapult track. Here's the major superstructure, broken main mast, and the broken rangefinder antenna. That rangefinder was one of several on the boat. Each of the main guns had its own rangefinders, but this one was the main one for the ship itself. And you can see from the condition of some of those structures there, all the dust, dirt on the bottom as I received it. There's broken rigging, there's the broken signals mast, and on the signals mast were 3 signals pennants. On the top left, that small black structure there are anti-aircraft guns. I'll show you a bit later on. Down at the bottom here, you can see all the dust and dirt of the model. This is a photograph to show you the rudder, because the rudder, of course, was a critical part of Bismarck's demise. It was not that shape, I say, not the rudder shape, which is rounded, but we'll see a rudder later on, which is the more conventional shape. Of the 3 propellers, was a propeller blade missing. Now, part of the restructuring of the model. This is the main mast that I've done. It's it's done in a wood called degame or lancewood, or lemon wood, sometimes it's called. That was 7,500 diameter, 1,000 inch, and 1.25 inches long. The platform there was the original from the mast, and the rigging itself I've done in fly tire silk, which is 1,500 inch diameter. And here is the mast re-rigged with the foremast rigged at the top left there, the main mast, and then the aft mast lower down. This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which fell off the model while I was cleaning it. It's an original one, but I had to make 3 more because they'd all been lost. And so, to give you an idea of the size of it, there's the 3 that I made, one of the 3 that I made, with the barrels which are 4.5 millimeters long. The tricky part for this was how we're going to find materials to make the barrels so small. And looking out of my front room in the house one day, I saw a Berberis shrub. Now, Berberis shrub, if anyone has one of these things, they're fierce. They have thorns like you wouldn't believe. They're long and thin, and even though you're wearing gloves, it'll go through the gloves. However, they're just the right size to make the guns for the replacements. 3 of those were required. Now, the stanchions that I showed you earlier on, a lot of them were broken and missing. So I had to make quite a lot of them. I had to make 100, in fact. So to make 100, which is a fairly boring job, generally speaking, I took a piece of degame, bored a hole in it. It was 110.11 of an inch thick. Drilled a hole which would fit a 0.032 inch diameter piece of bamboo. Then I clipped off the bamboo and filed it to the thickness of that gauge stone, which was 110,000. As a result, all I needed to do was to pop the stanchion out with a needle. 100 of those were required. In fact, I made 110, because as you can imagine, they just disappear off the end of your tweezers. And as they drop towards the floor, they grow wheels and disappear in every possible direction. So having put the stanchions in, I then used fly tire silk to make the rails. The upper rails were the ones I've done first of all, And that was done by putting the flight tire silk on with cyanacrylate, that's crazy glue, on the top to make sure it was stuck there, and followed that with a spot of regular white glue. The lower rail was just using crazy glue with dilute white glue. And then what I did was to put a little black speck with magic marker on the top. And here is the finished completed model. And there she is in the clamshell case, complete. Now, the clamshell case is an integral part of the model display. And I needed to construct a display case that will allow the mechanism of the clamshell to be demonstrated and how the model could be removed to reveal that script that you saw earlier on. So that was to be mounted on a baseboard. I mentioned before, earlier on, that the model's initials were in the bottom right-hand corner. The owner and I had to do quite a bit of research to find out whose initials they were. And eventually we found a Facebook group, which is interested in the prisoners of war in German camps. And we determined that, having looked at the list of prisoners in this camp, particularly of the survivors, the 115 survivors, it turned out to be Wilhelm Schmidt, who was a lead machinist, born in 1910 and 32 years of age when he was captured. So that finished that mystery off. So now the case, the baseboard itself. The corner pieces are made from boxwood and lined with felt, and they were a tight fit for the open clamshell. Nevertheless, I did make these two acrylic patches just to make sure that the clamshell wouldn't jump out of these containing courses. And there's clamshell in the baseboard within the quarter pieces. And the small clips that I made to hold it on felt braces. Here it is mounted on the baseboard. At the bottom, you can see a brass knob. That brass knob allows me to pull out a drawer, which will give the story of Bismarck and a little bit of information about the model itself. It's a feature I'd like to do on my models because the owner of the model is not always present. So if you can pull out the storyboard, then you'll be able to read all about it. And here it is with the storyboard brought out. So she is mounted on the baseboard. And there she is in the case. I put the dimensions there to show you just how small it is. It's 15.5 inches wide, that's the length of it there, with 9.5 inches deep and 6 inches high. And to give an idea of the scale of it, there she is. So that was the end of Bismarck 1. Some weeks after I completed the work on this model, I overheard a conversation about another model of Bismarck. Out of curiosity, I contacted the owner, who had indeed been searching for a restorer. I then took up the project, which I'll call Bismarck 2. Here's the model, Bismarck 2, in its glass case. As you can see, it's mounted on a walnut base with those cross-sectional, square cross-section borders, and the glass is 1/4-inch plate glass with the backing length is a mirror. And that makes it look fairly heavy. It is particularly heavy when you picked it up. Visually, it's heavy too. So I didn't think it did the model much good. So I had a word with the owner, and he agreed we should replace the plate glass with an acrylic glass. There she is with the plate glass cover removed. And the model is 20¼ inches long, and the scale is 1 inch to 40 feet. And to compare it with the first one, Bismarck 1 on the left, Bismarck 2 on the right, the length of the Bismarck 1 is 12 inches, and Bismarck 2 is 20¼ inches. So the scale is almost half. 1 to 70 feet in the case of Bismarck 1, and 1 to 40 feet in the case of Bismarck 2. Now, going back to Bismarck 2, here we have the damage on this one. The broken mainmast is in fact floating above the hull itself, held in position by that broken wire rigging. Difficult to see it on this particular photograph. There's a sliding door missing from that section there, and one of the 2 large cranes that were used to lift the model of the plane out of the water. It's broken on this side. On the left is the missing rangefinder arm, missing parts on the top there. The bottom left shows you the damaged funnel grating. Now that funnel grating is made of copper wire, and it was glued in pieces rather than being soldered. The glue was by now beginning to disintegrate, so that whilst there was one piece missing, as soon as I started to brush some of the dust off it, the whole thing collapsed. So that needed to be replaced. On the bottom right, you can see missing gun barrels. And there in the middle center is a broken crane boom, just at the bottom there. I mentioned earlier that there was copper used on this model. Strangely, the rail was made from individual pieces of copper, and those pieces of copper were glued together and relied upon big chunks of a regular white glue to hold them together. There were several pieces of this missing as well. One of the amazing things I found on this particular model was that whilst Bismarck 1 was made from a single piece of oak, this one was made from 4 pieces of oak, which was so skillfully put together that it was very difficult to see where the joints were. I pointed them out here because on the left-hand one, you might be able to see very thin vertical line. But on the right-hand side, you can't see the joint at all. The only way you can tell that there are pieces there are the change in grain of the oak pieces. The 12.5-inch armor of Bismarck is represented by that crease at the top. And you can see all the other bits and pieces flying around there, held together by wire rigging. The flying bridge wings were damaged, rangefinder arms were missing, and there's at the bottom right, the crane boom is broken. Parts were missing all over the place, which I could tell from either brass rings, copper rings with nothing contained in them, or they were completely missing, and all I could see was a lighter section of the wood. Over on the right-hand side, you can see where empty rings were used to line the individual fittings, which were missing. The gun barrel was missing and broken at the bottom. Here's a rangefinder arm missing. And at the top right-hand corner there is one of the anti-aircraft gun barrels. I just mentioned that the barrels are bit too long to be scaled and a bit too thin in diameter, but I only mentioned it as a comment, not as a criticism. Lots of copper was used on this model. Copper rings for ports, copper rings for studs, and at the side of the funnel there you can see half rings of copper used to simulate steps. At the bottom, I point out the fact that there are 3 ship's boats there with 2 hole holes in them. Those hole holes were 1 millimeter in diameter and hence slightly less for the copper rings mounting on them. On the right-hand side there is a spherical antenna cover, which in fact held the main rangefinder for the ship. It was perfectly spherical, out of wood. When I'm taking parts from these models, I want to make sure I know where the parts are and what they are. So I use a memory board. And as I take them off the models, I stick them onto a memory board like this, together with a name so I can locate them later on. At the top left, you can see that's a main mast broken. In the center there at the top is the broken port crane. In the middle, on the left-hand side, is a standard crane, and next to it is one of the masts which needed to be replaced. Running along the bottom are all the individual pieces of the rail, which I put on there not because I wanted to replace them on the model, but because perhaps the owner might have wanted them later on to show people. The 2 lead anchors were quite corroded, as you can see, particularly on the top one on the left-hand side. And so to clean that corrosion off, I used water with some detergent in it, and allowed that water to dry for 24 hours, and then coated the anchors in conservated wax, with the object of trying to prevent oxidation later on. This is my source of the copper wire. On the left-hand side is multi-strand bell wire, which was exactly the same diameter as the original wire used on the ship. And on the right-hand side there is 21 gauge regular held wire, which can use to substitute some of those pieces of copper on the model itself. Here's the main mast being re-rigged. I point out there are twisted wire shrouds, and on the left-hand side running down there are single pieces of wire which would be rigged from one mast to the other. This one I looked at because when I didn't realize it, when I was actually taking the photograph, one of those semicircular pieces of copper fell off to join 4 others which have been lost entirely. So here are the upper parts of the mast with the various spreaders held on by wire, thin wire. I did suspect that this model had been repaired previously, because in some cases the wire rigging was wrapped around the spreaders, as pointed out in those 2 spreaders, whereas those 2 spreaders had the wire pierced through them, through holes. And in fact, when I took all of the wrapped ones off to replace the rigging, all of the spreaders were pierced with a very fine hole, showing that perhaps there was a little bit of clumsy repairing previously. There were 2 aluminium doors, one of which was in place, the other one was in an envelope of little pieces which had fallen off the model. On the left, it shows the size of these doors. It was 8 millimeters wide and 1.5 centimeters tall. And you'll notice that the top edge is chamfered, while the bottom is straight across. And if you look to the middle photograph there, you will see that the chamfered edge fits inside a corresponding chamfer of that horizontal piece of wood, which allowed that door to slide in and out. And on the right-hand side, you can see its opposite number with the door closed. Slid inside like a very clever way of mounting. Now, to replace all of the stanchions on the rail, I used long pieces of copper. I happen to have it a piece of the broken barrel of that club. And so, to make the stanchions, I used a gauge of a piece of wood, cutting those stanchions to the right height, to the same height, and then laid the rail on top of those and soldered them with some solder to all of the stanchions. At the top right, there was a missing gap. There's a gap in the rail there. And this is how that gap was filled. It was a bridging piece. The piece was cut to exactly the right length, held in place by my very clever third hand and a dab of solder to finish it off. The rangefinders are a particularly important part of this model because of how accurate the gunnery on Bismarck was. The two arms on those were missing, and I noticed that I've noted the missing end of the flying bridge had to be replaced. So to make the arm, on my modeller's lathe, I took a piece of wood, degame, a lance wood, 0.3 of an inch long, made that little knob at the end, and pierced the end of it with a 0.45 millimeter drill, which was just the right diameter to allow me to fit that length of brass wire into it. The diameter of the base of that piece was 40 thousandths of an inch. There's the brass wire protruding from the end. And I then drilled a corresponding hole in the rangefinder unit itself, pushed the whole thing in, and a little dabadoo will do you a clue. This is the replacement for the broken crane. On the left is the original, and I had to dispose of the broken boom, but I kept the original base because I could see on the center, on the right-hand photograph, you see decorative rings on all the faces. Again, out of very fine copper wire, and I wanted to retain all of that. So I made a new boom, sanded it to the right shape, and put it at the right angle, and hence retained the bases, so that it was accurately fitting to correspond with the one on the other side of the ship. Bismarck had three propellers, and one of them had all of its blade missing completely. So as you see in the bottom photograph on the left, I replaced the blades out of aluminium foil. And here is the rudder shape. And you'll see from the comparison with the rudder on Bismarck 1, how different the two shapes are. The one on the left, of course, is the accurate one, whereas the one on the right has the rounded profile. Here's an overhead view of the cleaned up and finished model. Here we are going a bit further on with all the masts in place, the cranes in place, the guns in position. And here it is, finalized. Now, when I originally received the model, there was mold on the inside base, showing up those little white dots. And that's an indication that there was no ventilation in the case itself. I'll point out as well that the deck of this model was made in a chevron pattern, indicating that it was in fact strips of veneer that had been laid on top of the oak. The deck on the Bismarck 1 was in fact a sheet of very fine grained spruce, which indicated that the grain was running parallel with the center. So I had to make sure that there was some means by which the mold could be prevented in future. So here is the finished base. I killed all the mold by giving it a wash in Chavex, good slosh for 20 minutes or so, dried it off completely for more than 24 hours. And just on the bottom right hand side, I fitted some bumper feet. I did that because there were no feet on the bottom of this base, but it was very sharp edged, as you could tell from the angles. So putting the bumper feet allowed me to raise it off its supporting structure. And I also put on, as I usually do, a restoration and identification label. So this is how I ventilated the case. I drilled a hole right through the base, and using a shim washer, fitted it over the top, then filled the gap in between with polyester furniture batting. Closed it off with a piece of nylon screen. Nylon screen would of course hold it in, but it would also stop all of the bugs, tiny spiders getting into the case itself. And then to make sure that the model was actually raised off the base, I put in these wooden spacers so that there would be air circulation within the case itself. So here it is once again. Now I had to decide how I was going to fix this model to the base. When I received it, the model was actually not fixed at all inside the base, moving around. So I had to investigate how I could fix some screws through the base. And in doing so, I came across this label. And then had difficulty, of course, in reading it. It's obviously of European, German script. And if anyone can interpret it, so much the better. Certainly you can read the name Theo, but you can, the difficulty is reading the name after that. And we didn't know what the hieroglyphics E412 meant. So, any volunteers?
Looks like
Shannon, is that SCHENNEN?
Shannon is one guess.
it's
Johan's the second guess. No cigar for either.
what it is.
I know what it is.
Thank you.
When I saw this, I spoke to the owner who was thrilled because he knew it existed. So we joined a Facebook group for Camp 133. And in September this year, they came back to us with the following information. It was Sergeant Theo Schurer, they said. I believed it was Shuras, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. It was Schurer as he went through the list of prisoners. Sergeant Theo Schurer. He was captured in North Africa and arrived at Camp Ozada, west of Calgary in mid-1942. Camp Ozada was a temporary camp set up under canvas, pending the completion of Lager 133 when that was completed in December 1942. The location address was Section E, Barracks 4 of 6 barracks, and room number 12. So that was a nice bit of detective work that the base group did. So, knowing that the model would be put back on, I did in fact put a reproduction of that label on the outside of the case, which you can see when I bring it up later. The original model had 2 cords looking like rope around the base. These cords were perished, so I ran up some of these replacements on my small rope making machine. And here's the completed model with a new acrylic case compared to the original up on the top left-hand corner. It's amazing how many people, when they see something like this, want to move it, that they try to lift the whole thing by the glass case. So, to prevent that, I turn them always to brass security pins, which run right through the acrylic and fix the acrylic case onto the base itself. And there is the model itself, complete with the new acrylic case and the security pins. So that was Bismarck 2. These two models are a tribute to the skills of the modelers who made them under very limited conditions compared to those of today. It's hard to see how the degree of accuracy was achieved without technical drawings. And accordingly, we can only speculate as to how such information might have been available. The skill with which the parts were fabricated is astonishing, considering the likely difficulties of accessing necessary tools, such as sharp knife blades, files, and lathes and machining equipment. And there are indeed the raw materials, such as the wood, the veneers, copper wire, and cotton, under the wartime conditions. However, many trusted prisoners held jobs on farms, other locations outside the camps. So perhaps they were able to obtain these materials via their Canadian hosts. Bismarck 1, the owner of this model, lives in Toronto. He has close family members in senior active positions in the Canadian Navy. And consequently, he considered loaning the model to the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto, University Avenue, or to the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax, Nova Scotia. However, both these institutions require outright donations, and so the owner retains the model. Bismarck 2, the owner of this one, resides in Burlington. His father, from whom he inherited the model, held a Dodge DeSoto dealership in Lethbridge for a time during and after the war. The discovery of the maker's label has revived his interest in the Bismarck prisoners of war and encourages him to correspond with a Facebook group, which provided the model as details. He intends to pass the model on to his son in Vancouver, BC. Well, I hope you enjoy seeing these lovely models as much as I do. And I will now show you the models themselves when I reveal them by pulling off the towels.
That was amazing, Ray. To look at this and the fine detail, the patience you have had to have to do this, finding the materials, doing the research on the way it should have looked with all the broken bits, had to have been really, really challenging.
Yes, that was fun. I had black hair when I started.
Make sure you get some microphone.
It's on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? Yes.
Amazing, thank you. How many hours?
That only took me it took me about 600 hours to do that one, and about 500 for this.
This wasn't as damaged as that?
No.
Yeah.
Together with one bottle of aspirin.
Are there any other comments or questions? Did you have one?
There's a question from chat. I think you answered it. Where do you keep these models? I don't think you do.
No, I keep them as soon as they've been done. I borrowed them back from the owners. That one is gonna go to Toronto, staying in Toronto. This one is going to Berlin.
You have to thank them for us. Sally,
So you gotta bear in mind, I'm Navy, not air, but I don't get it. When you catapult off the side of a ship, you're gonna go splash, cause you're not going into the wind. Does the catapult turn so that they can take advantage of their forward way, or did they?
No. Presumably they turn right, beam onto the wind.
just a second. Let's do that. We need 2 mics here.
So they can only-
I assume that they turn beam onto the wind to allow it to be catapulted off.
Okay, and there's a question. Go ahead, Seamus, unmute yourself.
Can you repeat the question?
No, Seamus hasn't answered, he's. It's online.
Go ahead, Seamus. It's hard to hear.
No, he's got to get the mic on.
Seamus?
Shall we go back to him then?
Seamus, go ahead. Talk.
Is he muted because he often
No,
goes?
talk.
Oh, okay, we'll leave him for now and we'll take, are there any other questions or comments here? Jim?
I was impressed by fine handiwork like that. Historical question, where did the Bismarck go down and where is it now? And do divers explore it? And the second question is really, why are you referred to she on the ship? And what's the origin of calling ships about she? Does anybody know?
Let's do the first question first. Do you know where the Bismarck is? I think you do.
Yes, Bismarck, the wreck, is located about 470 miles west of Brest. And it was found in June 1989 by Robert Ballard, the man who discovered Titanic. And it's at a depth of 15,700 feet.
Nobody's diving on it.
As for the reasons for calling it the, that would be the subject of another long discussion.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Yes, Michael.
Is it wood or is it veneer? Yes, the hull of this one is 4 pieces of oak here, and the deck has a thin veneer of spruce laid in a diagonal pattern. Whereas on this model, the hull is oak, but the veneer on the top is spruce, very fine grained. If you look at it, you'll see that it looks almost as if it's been planked. It's just a very thin veneer.
Ron.
It's not a question, but not a question, but I'm suggesting that after we all over to this table and push that over out of the way so that it can't be knocked.
Excellent suggestion.
So, Seamus, is there a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can ask-
Okay, I'd just like to compliment you on your attention to detail and your making possible with visual and verbal presentations bring our minds back to what really happened many years ago. I really appreciate your presentation and thank you.
Thank you very much, James.
Any other comments or questions? I would like to echo what Seamus just said and give you a little token of our appreciation. You've done so much work. Your attention to detail, your focus, your fine motor skills. I mean, I guess you're using tools a lot rather than fingers. So let's give Ray a nice warm round of applause. And I have a token of appreciation here for you. My pleasure. I will have an opportunity to come up and take a look at these, and I'd also like to point out that Aaron